Hi, everyone. My name is Aaliyah, and myself, August, and Solaris are the creators of the video game Metadata Schema Text Adventure. Let's get into exactly what that means. Before we begin our deep dive into the background of this project, I want to share a bit about the group behind the text adventure you will be learning about today. Solaris, Gus, and I joined forces to create a text adventure due to our love for gaming, storytelling, and experience with visual novels. We knew that three UW MLIS graduate students creating a video game in a few weeks would be a stretch. Both Gus's experience in narrative writing, Solaris's keen eye for art, and my interest in video game research, we didn't want to wrap up a MLIS course on video games without trying our hand at making one ourselves. We also wanted to make sure future students in LIS 536 and other users of the VGMS feel comfortable with some elements of the schema before jumping into their own video game cataloging projects. Now, let's get into the VGMS text adventure. We understand the VGMS as a way to classify and catalog video games as artifacts and special collection items in libraries, homes, and institutions. Professor Jinha Lee, the instructor of this course, coined the video game metadata schema and defines it as such. The video game metadata schema has been developed to advance the cataloging and classification of digital games as cultural artifacts and support the use of games in education and science. She goes on to say that the original version of the VGMS was designed to be a useful resource for a wide variety of users who may be interested in describing and organizing a video game collection. Moving into the text adventure, while I had some enthusiastic familiarity with RenPy, a visual novel engine, I lacked practical experience with creating a game using the software. However, Solaris and Gus had both made text-based choose your own adventure games previously, so a text adventure with some visual components seemed like an obvious choice. It also seemed doable in the time frame we had remaining in the quarter, which definitely wouldn't have been true if we tried to make a more complicated game. You're probably wondering what a text adventure is. A text-based video game is an electronic game that uses a text-based user interface where the information is conveyed as encoded text in the UI. This form of gaming has existed as the basis of video game genre classification since the 1960s. In The Joy of Text, The Fall and Rise of Interactive Fiction, Lee Alexander writes, "The best interactive fiction designers know that a well-placed word in a room description should act as a clue to the player. And experienced fans of interaction fiction can often weigh their risks and possibilities from just a single paragraph of text." Now that you understand what VGMS means and what a text-based adventure is, Gus will now introduce our project goal as it regards our selection of using text adventure in relation to understanding the VGMS.
The main goal of VGMS the Text Adventure is to give players an overview of some of the main elements of the VGMS and why someone might want to catalog video games in the first place. The elements we chose to focus on were gameplay genre, narrative genre, mood, and art style, but the game also touches on several other elements in hopes of familiarizing players with the schema overall. Our hope is that players will come away from VGMS the Text Adventure feeling more confident about applying the VGMS to games, and more able to describe the reasons why using the VGMS and cataloging video games is important. Also, it is a game, so our other main goal is for players to have fun. If they're not enjoying themselves, they're less likely to play the game all the way through, so it's important that it be fun and not just educational. This project has several components. The main one, obviously, is our playable text adventure, which is hosted on textadventures.co.uk. We chose to host it on an existing website so that we could work collaboratively on it through a shared account login, and so that it would be easily accessible for players without having to download any files or use a desktop computer.
These are screenshots of the VGMS text adventure gameplay. As you can see, it truly is a text-based game. While I am a gamer, I've never played a text adventure game before, and found myself extremely shocked when the game turned out to be more like an essay or a short story, using minimal art and requiring quite a bit of reading. Here you can see pieces of a linear story that grows with each choice the players make. In this next slide, please enjoy some brief video gameplay from Solaris.
Hey everyone, Solaris here, and I'm here to give you a behind the scenes look at the VGMS Text Adventure Gamebook. Today, I want to go ahead and talk about some things that we're proud about and that we were able to achieve. The first one being the input feature. Now, first things first is we're going to put our name into the contributor name field. It's one of the first things that you do. This allows the player for some personalization and a rather standard choose your own adventure game. Later on, we can even call back to the player's name, or we have the option to create a new one. This allows for fun, mischief. We love it. From here, we're also very proud about our multiple choice options. We were able to do this by essentially not allowing the player to move forward until they get the right answer. To think, why are we choosing this? Next, this is all done by script, or aka code. Text Adventures does a really good job at making things accessible to the everyday person. So if you have any questions on how to code or how a certain code works for your particular game, there's so much documentation and it makes it possible to get done. And that's it. I'm going to go ahead and give this on over back to my group mates and they'll talk about user feedback.
At Professor Lee's suggestion, we added a user testing and feedback component to the design of our project. Although the timeline was pretty tight for developing the game, it was important to make sure that players were actually learning something and enjoying themselves, and that if there was anything that could be improved from the player perspective, we could improve it and make the game more effective. We put together 2 lists of questions to test whether players learned anything from the game. Number 1, what are some different attributes of video games that someone could use to catalog games, meaning sort them into categories or groups? Number 2, why might someone want to catalog video games? Who could be helped by having a standard for cataloging video games? We also asked them about how to improve the game. Was there anything about the story that confused you or could have been explained more clearly? Was there anything about the navigation or player choices that confused you or that could have been described more clearly? And of course, is there anything that would have made the game more fun for you? Based on player responses to these questions, we were able to make adjustments to the game, which we'll talk more about in a minute. Finally, we recognize that websites are not forever, and that if textadventures.co.uk were to go down, we could lose our game. For this reason, we also chose to put the entire text of the game into a PDF. The PDF is structured with headings and links among different parts of the adventure, so a player can navigate through the game by clicking on their choices and being redirected to the appropriate section of the PDF. Our hope is that this PDF version will allow the game to remain in a somewhat playable state and allow a richer version of the game with images and music to be reconstructed, even if it ceases to be playable on textadventures.co.uk.
Please feel free to pause and review the feedback from 2 players of the game. The first user to test this game played through the Google Doc version to check that the story flowed correctly and that there were no dead ends. This user was not a member of the LIS 536 class, so they were starting from scratch when it came to VGMS knowledge. The user reported knowing more about different attributes of video games, hence art style, mechanics, and mood, and the uses of cataloging for research purposes after playing. The second user to test this game played the game with intention to provide feedback toward game improvement. This user is a coworker of Solaris and a Mizzou Himalaya student. They have some cataloging experience, but no prior knowledge of VGMS. We realized over the course of the project that our initial vision wasn't going to be exactly what the final game looked like. For one, textadventures.co.uk is a useful basic game creator, but certain aspects of Text Adventures, like a system for flagging whether or not a player has chosen a particular option already, are very difficult to implement on the platform. We had to cut most of the loop style content out of the game and make it more linear in order to build it on textadventures.co.uk. Based on our user feedback, we made some changes to our initial version of the game. First, to increase immersion and engagement with the game, we added background music per the guidance of user number 1. Nothing in the music was directly related to the game, so players could still get the full content with the sound off, but players reported that music made the game more enjoyable.
In the time frame we had, we built a text adventure game that helped players understand the purpose of using the VGMS and get some practice with tagging games with certain major VGMS elements like genre and art style. We incorporated feedback from playtesters to improve the game, and the end product was fun and easy to understand. Obviously, we couldn't cover every element of the schema. It would make for a pretty boring text adventure, and we didn't have time to go into the necessary level of depth. But it would be very cool for future work in this area to find a way to gamify the VGMS as a whole. A game that taught a player how to use every element of the VGMS and transferred the player's input into a metadata record, so at the end of each level the player had entirely cataloged a game, could be a fun and useful way to get people familiar with the VGMS in more depth than we were able to cover. Similar text adventure games to this one could also be used to introduce players to other game-related metadata schemas. Maybe like an Escape the Dungeon style game about avoiding predatory monetization techniques in mobile games would be cool. Regardless, the use of games for educational purposes is an expanding field of study, and we're proud to have made this small contribution. And, of course, we hope it's useful for next year's LIS 536 students.
In conclusion, this has been an enlightening experience for all of us, and we look forward to witnessing and participating in the future of the VGMS. Thank you, Professor Lee, for this opportunity, and we wish you the best of luck in your studies. Sincerely, gamers everywhere.